Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Olivia and I make book and writing content. I am a freelance screenwriter as well as an aspiring novelist, but I also just really love to read and make videos about that. So today I am hooking you up with my autumn recommendations. Some nice either cozy kind of fall vibes or maybe some gothic kind of Halloween vibes, just anything to really sink your teeth into during the October and November months. It is still September, so I'm a little early, but I'm having a cup of hot chocolate. It is quite sweet and a bit too warm for the current weather, but I'm pretending. I'm just pretending. I think first I'm going to start off with probably one of the most obvious options for the fall, and that is specifically October. The book I'm recommending is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Coraline is technically a kid's book. He kind of wrote it to be a kid's horror novel or an introduction to kids for scary stories that is appropriate to them. Some people do find Coraline rather creepy, especially the movie. I didn't watch the movie when it came out because I was worried I was gonna be scared, and I just wasn't really into animation and stuff at the time, which is ironic because I'm pursuing kids animation writing now and this was a kids animation movie. But the book is actually, if you're a fan of the movie, the book is really similar. I read the book for the first time 2 years ago and then I watched the movie right after, and other than one additional character added into the movie, it's pretty true to the book. So I really recommend if you want something that's really creepy and eerie and just something really fast to just sink your teeth into, you could probably read this in a couple days. If not one, depending on if you have a day off or not. So we basically follow this young girl, Coraline. Fun fact, he named it Coraline because he misspelled Caroline and just really liked Coraline better, which I think is a cool fact. But it follows this young girl, Coraline, and her parents as she moves into a brand new house. And essentially she finds this kind of new room, kind of Narnia-esque entryway into this kind of portal that puts her into a different version of her life, where her parents have like buttons for eyes and all this kind of more eerie stuff happens, and she keeps exploring it and realizes it's not as safe as she once thought, and those parents and that world cannot be trusted, and she needs to get back to her regular parents before she is stuck there forever. It's a really fun story, would recommend. I honestly might reread it for Halloween this year. Another Neil Gaiman book to put on your TBR. This one, once you see this book, just looking at it, you can kind of tell it's one of my favorite books because of how much it's read. This is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I have read it. I've read the physical book, I think only once, but I have lent it out to a bunch of people. And then I listened to two different audiobook versions. One was Neil Gaiman narrating, the other one was a narrator, but there was cast for each character. So Andrew Scott was one of the characters, and I love Andrew Scott. And this, I've talked about it before because it's one of my favorite books ever, is a story that follows Bod. His full name is Nobody Owens. Essentially, when he's a baby, the book opens and his family is murdered, and he, as a baby, escapes from the murderer somehow and kind of crawls up this hill into this graveyard, and all the ghosts of the graveyard decide that they are going to claim responsibility for him and raise him. So he has two ghost parents, and it kind of shows it takes a village to raise somebody because all the ghosts kind of gather around him and raise him, and the person who killed his family is still kind of out to get him. So it follows him as he grows up into a young boy, into a teenager, and you know, his want to understand his world more, but also really want to be further involved into the ghost world in the way that he can't be because he's not dead. And it just this really beautiful coming of age story. It is a middle grade story, but honestly, I'm in my 20s and I loved reading this, and everyone I know who's read it has loved it. This is a beautiful, beautiful story. The end of it almost made me cry in like a very wholesome way. Like, if anyone were to ask me, I really want like a coming of age novel, I would give them this, because it just has themes talking about growing up and really accepting yourselves and like feelings of belonging and not belonging and figuring out your place in the world. Because Bod Owens is like this, he's in this in-between where he's part of the world of the dead but also the world of the alive. So it's just this really fun, magical world set in real time that I adored. Would highly recommend this one. Next up is a cozy fantasy, Can't Spell Treason without T. Sorry, I'm not good with lighting, so I'm trying to figure it out where you can still see it. If this is too washed out, let me know, because again, I'm not good with this stuff. Can't Spell Treason Without Tea by Rebecca Thorne is book 1 of the Tomes and Tea series, I guess. I don't even know this was a series. When I picked it up, I thought it was a one-off. It totally could be a one-off, but it's kind of set up for more, which is really lovely because I would definitely want more. Basically, this story follows a mage and one of the private guards of the queen as they decide to leave their life and their responsibilities to go and open up a tea/bookstore. With the love story between the two, Reina works as a private guard for the queen, who is very cruel to her people as well to her private guards, and essentially Reina's job is just very, very dangerous, and her partner Kyanth is a mage, and she's a very powerful mage, very needed in her world. So the story begins when Reina has yet again another near-death experience because of work, and she's basically had enough. She decides to take up Kyanth on her proposal of basically leaving their lives and opening this tea shop/bookshop. So we watch them flee their old lives and start brand new ones in this small town, and learning about the people of the small town, the dangers of the small town, the politics surrounding it, as well as maintaining distance from the palace that they just left, and them trying to find Reina and that whole debacle, as well as Kyanth trying to balance her responsibility as a mage because she's one of a kind, but she also wants to take her own life into her own hands. And it's this beautiful story about camaraderie, and it's wonderful watching the townspeople get to know them and them getting to know the townspeople and creating this beautiful atmosphere of this bookshop that they love and that is loved by others. So it's a very cozy vibe. It's like along the same lines of Legends and Lattes, which we'll get to, but this one has a bit more high stakes in terms of the lives that these people are leaving, because unlike Legends and Lattes, where it doesn't necessarily follow the protagonist as much, their past definitely does follow them, so they have to kind of work through that, and it's really lovely to see, and I hope that more books come out, and I will definitely read them if they do. Speaking of which, we have Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. I won't get into it too much. I actually do have a reading vlog of me reading it for the first time and reacting to it without spoilers, and I have talked about this a couple times before in different kinds of recommendations videos, but this is like the OG cozy fantasy. Essentially you follow Viv, this orc who leaves her life as a warrior to open up a coffee shop in a town where no one has heard of coffee before, and it's a similar vein of it's a lot of camaraderie coming behind her in a community. And this is very much more cozy fantasy than Treason because there's less stakes, so you kind of read this and you're waiting for something really big to happen, and it never really does. And when it's something like the climax does happen, it's really easy to resolve. So if you want something, if your life is super stressful and you're just like, I want to read a book and I don't want to be stressed, but I want to be entertained and feel cozy, this is a perfect read for you. Okay, next, this one I'm kind of throwing in there just because I want more people to read it. It is, I don't think it's set in fall per se, but it has a lot of same themes of the past two books I've talked about, so I'm gonna include it anyway. This is Days at the Morisaki Bookshop, and it is by, where's his name? Oh, Satoshi Yagisawa. There's actually a second one that just came out called More Days at the Morisaki Bookshop, which I'm about to get. I haven't bought any books recently because I'm about to start working at a bookstore, so I'm like, don't buy books, you're about to get a discount. That will be my first purchase once I get my discount set up. Basically, we follow a young woman in her early 20s, Takeko, who has just had her heart broken by her boyfriend who she really thought she was going to marry. Turns out he was cheating on her the whole time, which is really devastating to her. So she decides to quit her job and move out of her city that she's in to go live with her uncle Satoru, who has always kind of offered an open door to her. She's not super close to him, but he lives in Tokyo's book district, Jimbocho, and because he owns a bookstore that their family have kind of passed on for a couple of generations. So she goes to stay with her uncle. She's absolutely heartbroken, not super close to the uncle, hasn't seen him since she was a teenager, and lives upstairs in the bookstore. Her uncle doesn't live there, but she basically lives there rent-free with the condition that she will help out with the bookstore until she gets her like feet up off the ground and her life kind of together. As she's working at this bookstore, we see her strike a relationship with her uncle and getting to know him more, really focusing in on books and stories and meeting the regular customers that come in, and she wasn't a big reader at all before coming, but then she really rediscovers her love for story and talking about story with other people. She starts going to a coffee shop, meets some more people, becomes a regular there, and just really learns about the wonderful aspects of having a slower lifestyle, or a lifestyle in like a smaller neighborhood where everyone knows each other, and a love of story. And a few other characters get introduced, and you go on a kind of different journey in the second half. It definitely delves more into her family history, especially with her uncle and his ex-wife, so it really focuses on that in the latter half of the book, but the first half is her kind of rediscovering this love of story. I really love the first half of the book, not so much the second, but I wouldn't let that deter me from recommending it to someone because of how much I really did love the first half. And it's not that the second half was bad, I just wish it didn't necessarily like switch themes. Anyway, but I'm really excited to read the second one to see what else it has to offer, so would definitely recommend. Next, we're gonna go on the complete opposite side of this spectrum, and I'm gonna offer a Gothic book for you. And this is also a little weird because it was in my last video, which was my DNF video, so I didn't actually finish this book, but I got 200 out of 300 pages. The only reason I switched is just because there was some darker themes that were coming up that I didn't want to read at the time, but I definitely do plan on going back and reading this. I might do it in October for a bit of a spooky kind of atmosphere. Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. She's a Canadian author. Love. I'm Canadian for context. Like, just look at this opening artwork. That's pretty cool. Basically, it follows this young girl, Noemi. It's in the 1950s, I believe. She has this long-distance cousin. This cousin is recently married, and she's sending Noemi letters, and Noemi's father saying, like, really weird things are happening with my husband's family. This place that I'm living in just seems so haunted, and you know, there's rumors going around that her cousin maybe isn't mentally well anymore, is really unstable, so Noemi's father sends Noemi to go check on this cousin, and when she's staying there, she really starts to realize her cousin's right, and something is really creepy with this house. Maybe the wallpaper moves sometime, or you know, the family does have some hidden secrets, and there's a graveyard in the backyard. So Gothic is in the title. It definitely lives up to that. Again, the only reason I stopped reading it is because it had some themes of SA in it, so if you don't want to read anything with that, don't. This is only like a 300-page novel. It's not too long at all, and it's a very slow burn, very seductive, which I really enjoyed and will definitely get back into. But I would recommend this. And if you've read it, is the ending good? Don't tell me what it is, but is it good? Next, I'm going to give you a dark academia recommendation. Again, I won't get too into it because I have talked about this on the channel before. Pretty popular. This might not be your first time hearing about this. If We Were Villains by Emma Rio. It is a dark academia murder mystery. It takes place at a theater school at a Shakespeare conservatory. There's an ensemble of 6 students, I believe, and one of them is murdered. The story opens 10 years after the murder, where Oliver, who was convicted of it, is being released from prison, and the detective who investigated that murder when it was happening at the time is going to Oliver to actually see if he got it right and if Oliver actually is guilty. So Oliver, who knows the truth, takes us back in time. We stay with him and the detective in present time as he goes back to the school to kind of tell the story of what actually happened, but we go back into the actual time of the murder and see how it went out ourselves. So whether or not Oliver is the actual criminal or is not, you'll have to read it to find out. But this is very traditional dark academia, very much inspired by The Secret History by Donna Tartt, that kind of world, that realm. If you like Shakespeare, you'll love this. They're all pompous Shakespeare students. If you don't like Shakespeare, you won't like this. Or maybe you like making fun of them because they're all pompous Shakespeare students, so would definitely recommend. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Suzanne Collins. Suzanne Collins. Wrong author. Susanna Clark, not the Hunger Games author. I also don't know if it's Mr. Norrell or Mr. Norrell. I remember I used to say one of those two options, and then I listened to the audiobook and said the other, and I can't remember which one I said before that was wrong and which one's right. Norrell sounds better, but I think it's Norrell. Anyway, basically the story happens during the Napoleon War era. We follow 2 magicians, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, as the only 2 practical magicians of their age. Mr. Norrell found a way to basically ban theoretical magicians who would just study the theory of magic, whereas Mr. Norrell could actually perform magic, and he was just him for the longest time, but then all of a sudden Jonathan Strange showed up, so he eventually brought him on to be his pupil. Eventually, they do have differences on how magic should be studied and magic should be used, so they end up separating. There is a antagonist, a magical being who starts interrupting their lives, particularly people in their personal lives. It all started because Mr. Norrell, in the very beginning of the book, brought back this woman from the dead, and it had some very severe consequences. He and Jonathan Strange eventually have to end up trying to correct her. It's a period piece. It feels like you're reading a period piece. It's not contemporary text, at least it doesn't really feel like it. It did take me a while to get through. I actually really loved it on audiobook. Having someone read the text in the way that it's written with like a very posh kind of British accent really made it more enjoyable for me, so I would recommend that. It's a fantasy, but I would put it more in the dark academia world. I think it lives in a similar world to Babel by R.F. Kuang, but if you're wanting something that is very dark academia, period piece with a bit of magic, this is the one. And finally, again, this one might be a personal thing, but I really like reading fantasy in the fall and the winter, and I would recommend Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which might be funny that I'm recommending this because the second one, I made a review video on Iron Flame about how much I disliked it to the point where I'm actually not going to continue reading this series, but Fourth Wing was fun. I really like this in the fall because it has to do with dragons. I feel like dragons just kind of gives fall grungy. This is very much more like a fun story. It reminds me a lot of Divergent and like the Dauntless kind of atmosphere of it all. So basically we follow Violet Sorrengail. She is going through school to basically be a dragon rider, and students die daily because if you can't keep up, you die. I don't know why it's so severe. There are lots of ways in the plot you probably could have gotten around that, but whatever, it makes it more interesting, I guess. You basically see her go through the schooling system and realizing her mother is a big general, so we start to learn the political world that they're in, and it's not everything she thought it was. There's a lot of people working against her specifically because of who her mother is, and there's an imminent war on the horizon just based on the political climate that they're in, that she's slowly being let in on and how bad it actually is, and she was very naive to it before. But this one's really fun. We just kind of see her go through the school. The second one you get more into the political things, but the thing is with the second one, it feels like there was no editor, so it's, anyway, I did a whole review on it. But yeah, I would recommend Fourth Wing if you want like a fun fantasy with lots of dragons and like something that would be welcomed, in my opinion anyway, in the whole like Divergent Hunger Games era that we had. Anyway, that is what I have for recommendations for your autumn reads, your autumnal vibes, if you will. Let me know in the comments if you have any additional recommendations for me and for everyone else. I would love to hear, as well as if you have any thoughts on any of the books I just mentioned. I love a cozy fantasy in the fall. I am ready for more, so please. I have House in the Cerulean Sea, which I'm gonna read. I just didn't put in this video because I haven't read it yet. But anything along those lines, if you have recommendations, send them my way. I will see you soon. Thank you so much for watching this video. Feel free to follow me on social media, and happy reading, and I will talk to you all soon. Okay, thanks. Bye. Happy fall.